So they are also
Has everyone had a chance to go over the survey questions? Yeah, great. So let's just go through the range quite quickly. What is a server? Right. So the answer was dedicated computer that stores all the files and serves the requests. So when you're asking for a website, you're asking for it from a server. So serving those resources. So can you give me an example of the server?
Like I was buzzing, but I could just hear everybody talking.
So the problem was I forgot to turn the phone off.
Okay.
So it was left.
It's someone on me and I just
Okay, sorry. That answers my question on if I messed it up.
Okay. Yeah, that would be an example of Google. They have servers. You serve from the server. And what is a client? Right. It would be a laptop. Well, more specifically, it could be like a browser or program that's requesting resources. That can also be called a client. So it's not just browsers, it's apps and consume services as well. And so what's a query parameter? Just one single version.
the settings and values to load content.
Yeah, some additional information that indicates to the application. Usually it's what it is key value pair. So after the question mark on the URL, you'll usually see something equals something else, and that's setting a key to a value on the screen that causes some conditions needed.
Yeah.
How about of course? Yeah, so a particular physical location for a server, it could potentially serve a number of different services. And so the port directs traffic to the port of the server. So you could have you could login using SSH, which is port 22. The web service, as Jeremy said, is typically on port 80 if it's secured, and it's port 3. And so that kind of is a way to route requests to specific services on the server. How about a domain name? Yeah, it's just a name. So there's IP addresses and domain names. There's an application it's a domain name service. So when you request Google.com, for example, you make a request to the DNS servers. It'll tell you where the IP address is, and the browser can request the content from that server at that name. What is status code?
Message from the server, how your request succeeded or not.
Right. It provides some meta information about the status of the request. There's different levels of status code, which is mentioned below. So it gives you some indication of whether the request is succeeded or failed, or there's other statuses as well. So going right into it, what are the different status code levels? So there's 200. What does that stand for? Yeah, success. Yeah. How about 300? Yeah, redirect. The resource that you're requesting is like. How about 400? So if you go to the website, you get 404. If you requested something that isn't there, in the case of 404, there's also 403 forbidden, meaning you don't have the required privileges to view the resource. It's something that the client has caused to. It's not something that the server hasn't crashed. It's just you're asking for something that you don't have access to. How about 500 level? Yeah, that's where the server is crashed out. And it'll tell you 500. Yeah, get some indication that the server has had a problem with your request. It's not a problem with the resource that you're requesting. It's not a client-side issue. The server has had a problem. And so these are all returned in the headers, so you usually don't see these. Particularly the 300 level, they'll be invisible to you, but your browser will automatically just move on to where the resource is being, where you're being redirected. The 300 level is the export. But the one exception typically is 404. I think that's pretty simple. If you ask for a resource that doesn't exist on the server, you may actually see the 404 status code returned to in the content. But there's still a header separate from it. You're not seeing it. So it needs to be so yeah, and then the next question is about headers. And that's just extra information. There's clock, there's headers that your browser sends, headers that come back from the server. So your browser will indicate typically to the server what user you're using, which is the browser. So if you're using Internet Explorer or Chrome, it'll send a header saying the user agent is Chrome or Internet Explorer or Firefox. Although it doesn't, that's ever called Firefox. So, but so to the side, and then you'll get back information like that in the headers of the server responding. And how about CLD? So the last question in this section. It's the top level domain. It's a grouping of like you, everything on the core. Those are top level domains. So there's a hierarchy of organizations. These days it doesn't mean as much because the TLDs are referring a lot as IO. There's a lot of new ones that I don't even know. How about moving on to Git? What is a Git remote? What is a remote?
Version of your project that's not your local.
Yeah, it's the version of your project that's not on your local computer, it's somewhere else. If you're working with GitHub, if you're collaborating with other people, you'll be pushing to GitHub because that's the remote. Whatever the repository address is on GitHub, that's the remote. Okay, so how do you put code on GitHub? So you're working on your local repository, you're making changes, you're committing them. How do you get that up to the remote? Push, right? So yeah, you'll do git add, then you'll do git commit, and then you get push, and then this will get to everyone else who's working with you on the repository. And the final question: what is a merge? Yeah, a merge is just combining work from different branches. So someone could work on a patch branch, and then after that patch is ready to go back to the main branch, and merge that branch back. Okay, well we can. Well, here's a couple of additional questions that I didn't give to you, but we have a feedback form now. Would you like to have access to that? Would that be helpful to you? So that if there's something that you want to have changed, you can indicate that in form. You don't have to provide your name, I don't think. If you find that useful, I think we can make that available. And maybe every class, we can give you a link to the contact. It's just a few questions. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel you understand Git at this point? 3, okay. Is that kind of where everyone is at? Anyone feel like they have an understanding of 10? No, I don't. I would put my understanding at 7 or 8. It's the trickiest part of it is just the series of behaviors that we have to follow. So you have to do git add, you have to do git commit, push in that order. If you get it out of order, you can sometimes get your repository in a state that is hard to troubleshoot. So what would be an example of that? Maybe if you have some work that you haven't committed yet, and you want to change over to another branch, that's where you can start getting into some issues about, well, what am I going to do with this work that I'm not ready to commit? You can stash it, but you have to remember all these commands. So it's a matter of practice, and it's not surprising that the comfort in the other 10. And for myself, if I had to do a merge with a lot of conflicts, I would need to look into the documentation. I haven't had to do that, so. So a lot of times when you're pulling code, that was part of the prep, get pulled. It'll just come right into your problem branch, no problem. But if you make changes to the branch that you're pulling into, there'll be conflicts. And so you have to manage how you're going to merge those conflicts. So what's the status of the Google App Engine with everyone here? A lot of people indicated that they're able to do it. Okay. Chris, did you have any issues with Google App Engine? How about pushing the code to the GitHub repository? Okay. Was everyone able to do that? So I'll look at that and well, we'll see what Gary says about the schedule. And with it, I'm sure right now.
It changes every time.
I think we're doing something a little bit different today. Teaching color. That's kind of the changing around. Okay, I guess time for questions from you. Well, I've been asking all the questions. Are there any questions that you So, like the stuff after the question mark? Well, one use of it is when you log in to your website, it would take you to a login page. But after the login has occurred, you want to go back to the page that you're on. You don't want to go to the front page. So, in the query parameters, sometimes question mark next equals pages after you log in. And that can be saved. Sort of see, oh, this is my next page that you can present after you log in. There's other things like sessions, so you have question mark session ID and some logs. And that will keep track of who's requesting your resources and personalize the website to you. So we could have, this isn't a good example because I don't think Facebook does it this way, but I'll use it as an example. If you had it set up, a website could have it set up so that it always has an ID parameter on all the queries. So you index ID, question mark ID equals in the section ID. And then your section ID will be associated with your friends. So when you go on index ID, you're going to see stuff in your feed on your friends' home, and I can see somebody else's friends. That section ID is associated with your profile. So those are some of the uses of these query parameters. Yes. Good question. So this question was about fragments. So there's a pound sign and then something. Yeah. That if it doesn't get sent to the server. Cheryl mentioned that. What is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is links within a page. Like if you have a table of contents at the top of the page, and you have this long document with headings, you can link to a specific part of the page. You don't need to send a request back to the server. You already have all the content that you need to have. So with that fragment, you can put it in an href, in an anchor tag, in the table of contents, and you can click on a particular part of that document, there'll be a link. Like, if it was a profile, let's go back to that example. This isn't Facebook, but you might have a section that says friends. And if you click on that, you'll just scroll to that part of the page. So it's a link within a page. Yeah, you can set the partition page. The way that works is, in the part of the page that you want to link to, you put the anchor tag equals, the anchor can be a name equals fragment name. Then at the top, where you want to be able to link from to that point, you have the a href equals pound sign, and then that's the name of the fragment. When you click on that, it'll just scroll right to that point.
So in your document, you have to have a program that assigns that, define your fragment.
Yep.
And then when you put that fragment in your query, it takes it directly to the end.
Yep. 2 points. Anything? Anybody else have any questions? Let's see. That's a good question. We'll back to okay, so yeah, I mean, there's a long list of things. In order to create a web app, you need to know forms. You need to know user authentication. You need to know cookies. So there's a long list of things that put in parts. All of HTML, if you have any questions about aside from anchor tags, we've got a couple of questions about layout, like positioning division. I think for me, the hard part of designing a website, this is the code itself, this is designing the layouts, getting the styles that look good. So that's there are a lot of design websites that are useful for that. So not just the straight up code, but how do you organize the concept? And I'm not going to go through a list of specific suggestions, but that's probably the toughest thing. I think at this point, you guys are probably getting this hang of tags. Some of them have just the single tag. And it's really how you organize that content. In the case of organizing like columns on a page, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But if you're working with one of the things that makes it tricky is when you're writing the code for the document, you're going from top to bottom. You're not laying it out the way you want to actually see it necessarily in columns. So you have to keep track of which block of HTML code is going to be what part of the screen. And so when you're trying to position blocks of content next to each other, you end up with a situation where the block of code that you want on the left is could be above or below. Usually, I would say probably called code that you're going to have on the right. And so let's take the example of positioning two divs next to each other. The block level elements that cause the page to flow. The content is not going to be similar. It's not going to be known as a block level. So if you just program your divs without applying these styles, they're just going to appear one on top of the other. It's a block level. So you have to apply some tricks to get those to line up. A div on one side and a div on the other side. And So this was a question that was actually in the Slack recently. The way that I suggested doing it was just applying the style floats. Not equals, but float all wholly left. That you want to do on the left. And then the next div will just flow right next to it. So you can easily get concept that's laid out next to the wall. That's not the only way to do it, but that's the way to do it. Right. So yeah, when you get on a smaller screen, you don't want those lined up.
What was the Git vote in your group?
I think the consensus. Well, yeah, about 3 probably. Yeah.
Seems about the same across the board.
I would put myself at about 7 or 8.
On some days, I feel like I'd rate myself like a 2. On other days, I might get as high as an 8. Okie dokie, we will get started for tonight. And tonight will be a good indicator of how most evenings are going to flow going forward. So, whereas before there's a lot more lecture, you're going to get a lot more time within your groups now because my voice is terrible to listen to for myself. And because it's better for your group to work together. If, while I'm going over, I'm going to cover Git initially up front, because it seems there's a lot of confusion there. I have a lot of confusion throughout my day job using Git, so it's fully understandable. I've been using Git for 5-ish years now, and on that scale of 1 to 10, on any given day, I feel like I'm a 2 to an 8. So don't feel bad about where you're at using Git. While I'm covering Git, I'm also going to cover some of the GitHub pieces around if you want to publish one of your sites, so using GH pages. And remember, if you have questions or you want me to cover something else, message in Slack in the Hello KC Slack channel. And remember to tag me so that my computer makes a sound and I hear it to go and check. Also, it then helps for everyone else to see that question in case I don't say it correctly. You're also free to ask it still, but posting it in the channel will ensure that I notice it because I can hear it. Although if you raise your hand and you should hear it. Also, I have the link in there as well for the class. It should be getting recorded. First part didn't get recorded, but it wasn't very exciting. This next part will be very exciting. So what I'm going to cover here is getting started on, so normally what we do is you come to GitHub, you can log in if you're not already logged in. Sort of depends. I'm already logged in. You go to GitHub. I'll zoom in. Well, I zoomed in too far. There we go. That's about what it will look like. You'll have a news feed that will be a combination of people you follow on GitHub, similar to if you like pages on Facebook or if you follow people on Twitter. You'll have a news feed that kind of has the stuff that they've been doing. This is a news feed that will mostly include all of my coworkers because all of our code where I work is on GitHub. So most of my feed is the work that they're doing there. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see this Your Repositories. And whenever you want to create a new repository, you click your New Repository button. We can come up with a name. This one will be HTML me something. You can give an optional description, which in this case, I will give one. I'll make it public. I can't remember what it is. There we go, the unlicensed. As a software developer, whenever you look across GitHub and you see other people's repositories, if there is not a license file in it or the code is not licensed, same way that images are licensed, same way that any sort of product, if you have an agreement with a company, if the code lacks a license, it is assumed to be the sole usage and ownership of the person who created it, so you technically have no right to use it. So if a business were to see your code, they can't use it even if it's the awesomest thing and it solves their exact problem. So that's why I'm filling out this add a license button so that it initializes my repository. So I can tell this one to initialize it with a README, and I won't do anything with the git ignore. Don't worry about that. And then I click the create repository button. This goes and creates a page with some stuff on it already. So then I come over here, click the clone or download. I will not use the, so click back to copy it. That'll copy it to your clipboard. If you notice, because I clicked that license and I said initialize it with a README, it already has the first commit in the repository and it already has some stuff on here. Anytime on GitHub that you have a directory with a README, with a file called README in it, capitalized, lowercase, camel case, it will go and attempt to render it in our readable fashion on that page, which is a nice thing to have. So now I have the repository, created the repository, now I have one, and it has a branch default that is called master. So what I will do then is I do a git clone. So now I have the HTML me something project here. So what I will do here, that's not what I meant to do. I'll create an index.html file. Part of what I'm wanting to show here is how to also get, feel free to correct me because I'm doing this from memory and I don't actually write the bulk of what I'm writing here, ever. All right. Is it href or source for the link? All right, so then we'll have a body of an H1, let's do the title. Ah. And if you are someone who uses Vim, you know I'm not that great because I just use my arrow keys. I forgot about something that's going to happen. I can do that. I know how to use this. All right, so that's my index file. Has a wee bit in there. So next up, I have a relative URL. I can actually remove that period, it's unnecessary. To a folder that is CSS. So I'll create a folder. And then within this folder, I'll have a CSS file called base.css. And in here, we'll start with an 18 pixel font. We'll say width is 100%. And then on body, we'll do a width of 80% and we'll give it margin 0 auto so that it's centered. And now we'll make our H1 be 3 times larger, like we did before, and then we will make the paragraph tags a really awesome red color, because that's what you want to read text in.
What is the RE?
REM?
Yeah.
RIM. So we covered RIM last Thursday. It is a measurement of font size. So in the HTML, this relates to the cascading style sheets. On the HTML element, I have defined that all elements inside the HTML tags, so that will be everything inside the HTML content there, will have a font size of 18 pixels unless otherwise specified. So then what happens in the H1 is it says make the font size 3 times the root element.
Okay.
So the R is root element instead of just EM, which will only go to your immediate parent element. So an advantage to using the REM unit instead of the EM unit is to ensure your font size is consistent across your entire site and pages, and so you don't end up with what has happened in the past on some news sites where an article might end up, due to the way they put things together, nested inside another article, and you end up with a huge header because the font size of its parent article increased it, and then it got increased even more in the nested article, and then you end up with a site that can look pretty weird. And there are some small performance optimizations that the browser can make when you use REM units instead of EMs, because it knows how large it is immediately when it renders the page. 0 auto will give it no margin on the top and bottom, and we'll give it an auto on the left and right. So most CSS attributes have a shorthand that you can use so that you don't have to fill out all 4 values or both values, or type out margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right. They generally have a shorthand that you can use within them. So now if we want to see what this looks like locally, come over here, run that Python 3. That is on port 8000. So my CSS, you can see it's working because it turned it red. That's actually why I chose red. In general, if I'm curious if my CSS is actually working, I'll just change it to be an absurd color so that I know it's happening and I don't have to wonder, oh, is this here or is it not here? Or I might make it really big font size. And I do that probably 3 to 4 times a day. All right, so we have our little project here, file. So now we're over here in Git, back in the terminal. I run git status, and right now I'm on branch master, and I have not added my index file or my CSS file. So in order to add those, there are multiple ways you can add files to be tracked. The way that I normally do that, because I'm lazy, is I do git add and then period, and that just says add all files to this current directory and below.
Question, Gary. I've heard a couple of different things. Some people say when your website gets to be big and you've got lots of files and lots of JSON and stuff like that at the end, that git add all just adds a bunch of extra stuff. That if you haven't touched it, you're just adding stuff to your Git repo there that you don't need. It's like extra copies of documents that you don't actually change. And then I've heard other people say, just make sure you get it all and just do the, git add all or git add dot. What's your opinion on that?
All right.
Better to just put in selectively or everything.
So to kind of paraphrase the question is, in a more production style web application or in more realistic setting where you're writing code, is it common to sort of do this git add generically add everything, which would be git add -a, or git add period? And the answer is it really just depends on what you're doing, because if you run git status, you run git status, you know what files can be added. So if you're working in an application, there's actually a file called git ignore that will generally have a bunch of different expressions in it that will ensure those types of files, no matter what command you run, do not get added to your repository. So generally, when you're working in an application, it is safe to run a git add period or git add -a with capital A. There was some chat on Slack earlier today in that general channel about the period or the -a. I've worked with many megabyte repos, which is rather large for a code base, and I've noticed no difference between the two commands. Just you add things to the index. It's not really going to be it's not really going to matter for you developing code whether or not you run git add period or git add -a. The thing that will matter is if you're pushing code to GitHub and it's publicly viewable and you didn't intend to put a certain file in there, which is why if you always go the safe route and you run git status before you make a commit, before you add anything to your index, you can know, okay, for this, I have a CSS folder and an index.html folder that are going to get added. Now, because that is a folder, the CSS, if I do a git add period here, it'll add everything in that folder. So if you are curious what would get added in that case, you can cd into that CSS folder. And then if I list what's in the folder, there's only one file. So then I know, all right, that's all that's going to get added. I believe I can actually run a dry run command, but I'd need to Google it, so I'm not going to do that. What we see here, we have the directory and the file to add. So I'll do the git add period. It says to add everything at this directory and below. So now I've added that base.css file and the index.html file. So what I'm going to do next is the git commit -m which added the file. So we can see what it said here. It shows me the message I made, tells me I changed 2 files. There were 28 insertions. What that means is between the 2 files, I created 28 lines. And then the create mode and files, you're likely not interested in that, but these numbers represent how if someone else were to pull down your file, it would work on the operating system. You probably don't care. Each one of those numbers has something to do with whether or not a user can open the file and read it, the user can write to that file, or the user can execute the file, which generally you're not going to care about that. But if you were curious what those numbers meant, that's what they recommend. They mean. So now I run git status after I've committed, and I can see that my branch is ahead of origin master by 1 commit, which is the commit I just made. And then it even recommends what I do in order to publish my local commits, which is use git push. And then they'll go out to my remote. And if you're ever curious what your remotes are, so if you're trying to figure out where your code's going or you're trying to push your code and it's messed up, if you run git remote, it will say, oh, you have origin. So then I think you can do v. Yes. Git remote -v, which is short for verbose, will then tell you the full URL that you have. So I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit so it's easier to. But then what you can see here is that I have an origin. Origin's fetch URL is that whole URL. That .git should be on the same line. It's not, because it's not large enough on the screen. Oh, that's why. There we go. Now you can see it better. Oh, I forgot to plug in the other TV. I'm sorry. So now you can see I have origin. It will show each one twice because you have a fetch and a push URL. The fetch is where you go when you run a git fetch or a git pull command, which is where you go and get code that people have updated. And the push is where you're going to end up pushing your code. Most of the time, those will be the same URL. So in this case, it is the URL that I copied whenever I cloned. So it is the URL that is right over here on GitHub, right here. The clone with HTTPS URL. So now that I have made a change, committed it to master, and I am one commit ahead of my remote on GitHub, I can do a git push origin master. And this is where I actually have to do something different because I have multi-factor authentication on my GitHub account because it's a requirement of where I work. So what I will have to do, it's the same thing other people have had to do. I will need to do a git remote remove origin. Now if I do a git remote, I don't have any. So now I'm all lonely on my own. So then what I will end up doing is this use SSH, which is a different URL. It communicates differently with GitHub. So we've talked about the protocol at the start of the URLs. So you have HTTP, which is the hypertext transfer protocol. And then you have HTTPS, which is the hypertext transfer protocol over SSL. Don't worry about that last bit, but they are two different protocols. So what's happening here is I'm using the GET protocol, which is different than HTTP. And in this case, specifically, what ends up happening is it uses SSH, another protocol, to then communicate with GitHub. And that's where GitHub. So if you're curious what I'm doing, GitHub use SSH key. And GitHub has a whole article about it. If you use what they're calling SSH keys, I'll link it now for the curious in our chat. I will also add it to the class notes. It makes you not have to type your username and password every single time you push things to GitHub or you pull things down from a private repository. So now what I can do is git push origin master. And it now pushed my code out. One of the reasons I wanted to show you it failing is some of the times it will give you a somewhat useful message when it fails, which was remote invalid username or password. It didn't actually allow me to type a username or password, didn't even give me any information as to why not. But I knew that was the problem because my GitHub account requires me to enter a cell phone code whenever I log into it initially. So a lot of the errors you might get if you attempt to do a git push, git pull may not initially be the most helpful. So it is always worth copying and then pasting it in Google. Generally, see right there. The first answer that popped up on Stack Overflow was my problem. So remember that. As you start to see errors when you're using Git, if you just paste them directly into Google, a lot of the times, first 1 to 3 links will have at least an idea to try to help you get over that. So now what we've done with our repo here is we created one on GitHub. We then checked it out, made some changes, committed those changes, Now we've pushed it to GitHub. So now if I go over to the repository and come over here, I will refresh the page. And you can see now there's this CSS folder and there's the HTML folder that we made. What doesn't exist currently is that GH Pages branch. And that is because I have not made one. What the GH Pages branch allows you to do is host a static site very easily if you just have an index.html at the root folder of your repository. And a very easy way to get a GH Pages branch up and working, I've got high hopes what I'm about to do with zooming in while this isn't full screened yet. We'll make it not break. So I can run a git branch command. All I have locally is a master branch. And then I can run git branch -r. And what that says is git branch, what are my remote branches? That -r says remotes. The only remote branch I have is origin master. So if I want to have everything that is in my master branch be on the hosted website, an easy way to do this is to do git push. So normally we just type git push origin master and it would push that out. That is actually shorthand for typing git push origin master master. We'll get the exact same result. What this syntax means is git push, so push my code to the remote that's called origin. So for us, it's almost always going to be GitHub. And then it says take my master branch and push it, take my local master branch and push it to a branch on GitHub called master. When you don't include the colon master, it assumes that's what you mean. The reason I show you this is a very easy way to publish your master branch to GH Pages so that you can have a hosted site, is that if you just run git push origin master :GH Pages, it will then tell you delta reuse 0. Most importantly, it will say new branch, master, push to GH Pages. So now if I run a git branch locally, I still only have a master branch. So just so it's clear, so everyone further back might be able to see. I run git branch, I still only have locally a master branch. But if I run git branch -r, I now have an origin GH Pages branch and an origin master branch. Because I went and ran the git push origin master branch to a branch called GH Pages. What that will do is create a new branch if it does not exist, or it will attempt to update the GH Pages branch. If you do this a lot, you'll likely end up accidentally creating what are called conflicts for yourself, and it will complain and say you're not allowed to do this because your branches will potentially get out of sync. If you never modify the GH Pages branch and you only modify master, this command will be safe most every time you do it. And then you'll get that updated GH Pages branch. So now if we come on over here, refresh the page. Yes? That is a good question. The question was, if you update your master branch, will it automatically update GH Pages? It will not. So if you want to update GH Pages after you've made some changes to your local master branch, so let's say we come over here and we decided that we want these to have a margin of left and right, no margin, top and bottom. We want it to be 2 rems. So we come over here, run git status, So then we're okay with that change. Git commit has an optional flag you can pass to it, -a, which says all files that I already am keeping track of, commit those changes automatically with the message that follows. So add p style. Now I've added that here, so now what I can do is I can do git push origin master. This only updates the master branch. So we can see that effect. So there are 3 commits on my master branch. Now if I come over here in the UI and I switch, so it's on the master branch, has a little check mark down here. And up on the commits, it says I've made 3. So now if I click over to the GH pages branch, there are only 2 commits in here. So commits that you make to master do not make it to GH pages automatically. Each time you want to update GH pages, that branch, you'll need to run a git push origin master :GH pages. And that will then push all of what is your current master branch into your GH pages branch. So now if we come back over to GitHub, we're looking at the GH pages branch. So if I refresh, it now has 3 commits. Now what this allows is that you can go to GitHub when you have a GH pages branch will automatically create a site for you. So now I can go to my GitHub username, .github.io, and then the name of the repository. So HTML me something is the name of my repository. I can go there, and then it automatically takes me to the page that I'm on. Now, if you notice, it's not styled correctly. Yes. Yeah, so the question, so if you, it's not that if you push too many times to GH pages, it will cause a conflict. The likely conflict is if, and this is in general with Git branches, if you make changes to your branch and then someone else makes changes as well later, and then someone were for some reason to just update the GH pages branch on their own and not touch the original master branch over here, you can end up with conflicts in the GH pages branch that were never in the master branch. So then when you say, oh, I want to take everything on my master branch and put it over here, Git may not be able to do that. So generally what I recommend there is then just don't touch that GH pages branch and always just commit to your master branch like you normally would, and then just push your master branch into that GH pages branch on the remote. You're welcome. Now, I know why this isn't working. And does anyone know why my href/CSS base.css is not correctly working?
Something wrong with the link?
So if we just go directly to the URL, so this has the CSS. We can see it here if we go directly to the file. But whenever you do a slash, that says to go to the root of the domain. And if you notice, due to some things I have set up with GitHub, my own personal website, I get redirected to garypawley.com/that-github. So it's attempting to find that file in a spot that it is not, which is why I often recommend for relative URLs. I didn't do it because I doubted myself. That dot period will tell it to look at the local path or directory and below.
What would happen if you hit the dot and the side?
We can find out later. So if I do a git add, I can add the index file directly, and I can git commit it. Actually, just do this. So some people have had this happen where they'll run git commit, forget to include that -m, and then something like this pops up that tells you what's going to happen, but you're uncertain what's going to happen because the a regular editor. What I recommend at that point, if you're stuck here, is you can do a shift : which is the key to the right of the L, and then you'll end up with this little colon over here with this little cursor, and if you just type Q ! And then hit enter, it will get you out of there, and then you can type git commit -m, and then your message for your update. Push to master to make sure it's updated, and then I push to the GH pages and also update it as well. So now if I come on over here, we can see that the styles are now taking place because the relative URL is now correct with that period. Now, if you're curious what happens if you go and modify, so you can actually click edit as HTML in here. Reloads it, and it's broken. But the real question was, what happens if you remove that? And you just have the CSS directly. And it is that it reads it correctly. You don't need the /. I prefer the / because it's more explicit, and it will work correctly when you use build tools for your files. So when you start using frameworks like Angular or any backend framework, when you use the /, it will know how to interpret that, and it will for sure use the current directory. Whereas if you don't use the /, it will depend on whatever framework you're using. If it decides to go all the way up to wherever all your files are at on your file system, it can be weird. So I do recommend always just doing the / for relative linking. And for most of the links, if you're going to be hosting your assets yourself on your own site, serving it to the client being the browser, using the relative URLs will ensure that if you change your domain or you move your code somewhere else, that will always attempt to get those static assets, so the CSS files, JavaScript files, images, from that same server. It's a better idea than hard coding the URL. And then a nice bonus, if you are having problems and say you're using something like Chrome, you can open the debugger. You have the Elements tab, which you can modify the elements in here. And then you have the Console tab, which will tell you a lot of the times what has gone wrong and where it went wrong. So this is saying that it attempted to make a GET call to this location, which was what I messed with in the Elements tab. So it makes it easier to tell what you might have messed up if you mistype a URL or something inside of your document. Alrighty, if there are no more questions with Git, we will begin the walkthrough for this evening's studio. Actually, has everyone installed Google App Engine? The App Engine launcher. Oh, it opened it over here. Well, there we go. So if I come up here, so the way the Google App Engine launcher works is you set up each one of your apps. If you're on the Mac, you have a little plus thing down here to go and add a new app. If you're on Windows, I believe there's a button higher up near the top of it that lets you add new things. So right here, the sample app that it starts you with, this will be on 8001. So now I can go to localhost 8001, which I can't read. That's the admin port. You want to go to 8080 and ignore no. There. 8080 and go to this great hello world page that it gives you by default. And the port matters because that tells the browser where at on your computer to find your website. Sort of like if you were in an apartment, the domain name is kind of the apartment building. That port tells them which apartment number to go to inside the apartment complex. So I will stop that one, and I will also stop that one. Oh, that one's broken. So we will begin now with our first studio / walkthrough. Hopefully not everyone does it at the exact same time, because then it'll be slow, but you should follow what I do once I get to the link. All right. So this is tonight's class. So the first thing we're going to go to is the Flick List Studio. The goal of this studio, and it's going to build on itself throughout the entirety of the rest of the class, is going to be to build what's called a full stack website, which means we will gradually add HTML, a processing server, which in this case will be a Python server. So Google App Engine, you write Python code, and then it ends up serving up your files or your strings, however you choose to write that. And then eventually we will add a database. So this project is going to be a movie site, kind of. You're going to end up creating all of your favorite movies, putting them on a site so then you can see your Flick list, Flick being movies. It's a cool new hipster term for movies, flicks. So your Flick List app is what we will build, and it will be some of you all's first full stack website. Full stack in bold there. Largely just means creating the data all the way from the back end to the browser. Instead of Unit 1, we were just kind of in the back end writing Python. Last week, we were just in the front end creating HTML. This will be the first assignment, kind of marries the two together. So then you'll have your first bit of full stack. So we will start the walkthrough. Feel free to follow along as I run these commands to get the project set up, because you will need to do the same. So this first bit that we're going to do is the most laborious, because we're going to check it out, make sure we're on the right branch for each class. The way it's going to work is it's going to build on itself. So tonight, the branch you will work on is Studio 1. And then next week, the branch you'll work on, well, next class that we cover one will be Studio 2, Studio 3, as we go through each studio. And what we'll work on overall for this Flick list related to HTTP, so the protocol that we're using, and then the methods that have been covered is we will use get and post. Get to retrieve documents, post to create and update documents. So to get started, we will run the git clone. So git clone, the flick list. So now I have flick list. Actually gonna go, oh, I didn't mean that. Actually, I won't be pushing to this repository, so I don't need to worry about that. But you can find the repository on GitHub because that's where it goes. Same URL. So now I have the code. I'm gonna move that closer so I don't have to keep going over that. So the next thing that we'll do to get it set up is we will create a new app. So I'm gonna delete this one. I cheated because I already did it to make sure I wouldn't mess up. So now I'll come over here, we'll call this flick list Python. Application ID must be the same name as the folder that the code is within. So I'm gonna go to my choose. I happen to store all of my code. So if I go to my home directory on my Mac, I store all my code in another directory called src. And within there, we can see that I have the flick list Python folder, which matches the name up above where it says flick list Python, the application ID. So then right over there, it's saying send name, make sure it lines up, and then you don't have a typo. If you do, the app will not work. And it will be a sore disappointment. So now I choose it. You can actually choose whatever ports you want. And then I will make this 8002 for the application port. I can click create. And then if you just click run, has a nice little green little circle next to it to indicate that the app is running. You can verify that, like we did a few minutes ago, by going to a new tab, localhost, and then the port that you chose to have the site on, which in this case, the default is saying, hello, summer of code. So we created the app. So now what we have is a default Google App Engine code base. That contains a git ignore. So this file I talked about before. You don't really need to worry about all the syntax in here, but what this does is it protects you against accidentally adding files to your repository that you don't mean to. So in a real project, like this one that Google sort of created with using Google App Engine, there are a load of things in here that it just says ignore these. The other file you'll see is this app.yaml. This file is all of the configuration that tells Google, the Google App Engine, how to run your app. So what it says here is this application is called Flick List Python. This is the first version of it. It's using the runtime of Python 2.7. Its API version is 1, and it is thread safe. What thread safe means is that it can use what are called operating system threads in the program. If you choose to do any of that, you likely will not and won't care. These handlers tell it where to find files. So it has 2 configured by default. And the reason it says URL is that's the URL it will go to in the browser. So right here, it says for the favicon.ico, that slash is needed as an escape. So much like in Python when we did the new line or a tab, we needed the /n or the /t. In order for Google to read this file and know that you need just a period there, you have to escape the period. That's due to how it reads it. That is what's called a regular expression. That's how it reads these. But the URL is the URL that will be in the browser. And then it says, all right, go and find a static file called favicon.ico. So most websites you go to, right at the root of the website, there's a favicon.ico file. That's what causes it to have things like Google has this little slide dealie, GitHub has a little octocat. Other Google sites, so by default, there is a favicon file in the code base. That is this favicon.ico, which is a little Google symbol. Looks a lot like Google Drive symbol. This other URL says, so $* means everything. Do is look for the favicon file, and the next thing it's going to do is it's going to say, every URL that you hit, call this script main.app, which in this case is your main.py. So this is your app, and it's the main.py file. That's how it links them together. And then down here, this is more for Google, that Google App Engine container so that it knows how to run. It's a web app 2. It's what it had mentioned is what we're running with. And then it says which version it's using. And index.yaml, as you can read in here, we're not doing anything with it yet. It's just a placeholder file with nothing in it that we may use later. Anytime you notice a .pyc file, you can safely ignore it. That is a Python compiled file, which Python, as we discussed in the first unit, is an interpreted language, meaning that it is dynamically read each time. However, Python, the interpreters make an optimization after it loads the file for the first time. It then compiles the file for that operating system so that it doesn't have to read through it every single time. So then it can kind of treat it the way that compiled languages are used. So Python is an interpreted language. It sort of makes a minor optimization there. You can ignore all PYC files. Just in case you were confused on why that file might be in the directory you're looking at, it's a file you can ignore. It's an optimization that Python makes. So now, this is what serves the website. So right here, web app 2, we did import web app 2. That is the package in Python that will serve the website. Right here, we go and create a class called index. It inherits from a web app 2.request handler. And then we just created a function called get, and that returns with hello summer of code ! With the self.response.write. And then, so that's the class that responds. The way it all gets set up is it says we have an app, create an application, at the root index of that application, use this class, and debug equals true. The reason that debug equals true is used there is so that when you're running locally, you kind of see the errors that happen if you mess something up by accident. And this assignment is not assignment, really. The studio is going to build on itself going forward all throughout. So the first thing we're going to do in this walkthrough is we're going to randomly return a movie from our flick list of movies. And to make how this is running a little bit more clear, I run other things on my computer. So 8002, that's where the hello summer of code comes from, over in our flick list. So we have hello summer of code there. The reason this works is because there's a function called get. And it automatically routes because when the browser makes that request, it uses the method automatically get to retrieve it. So if I do the localhost 8002, and then I do the get, I don't normally do this, but I was too slow. I have to be faster. So right there, we can see. So the book covered using Telnet to sort of show how HTTP works. We made a GET request at the root URL using HTTP 1.1, which is what the browser is most likely going to use. And then the server automatically responded with what are called headers in the response. The content type, which tells it what type of file it responded with. In this case, it was an HTML file. Cache control, you don't need to worry about that. Content length, just tells it how big the file is. Server is often the type of server that's being used. So development 2.2, that's the type, that's the name of the server that Google named it. And then the date that it was served, which is in GMT. So that is, I think, 6 hours ahead right now, depending on daylight saving time. It's usually 5 or 6, I can't remember. And then, most importantly, you can see here that it actually responded with the hello summer of code. And it did that automatically because we made a GET call. If we were to telnet and make some other type of call, it responds differently because it's not actually defined in our class. So post is another type of call you can make. It actually went and gave us a response code of a 405, method not allowed, meaning we're not allowed to post there. So my hope was to remove some of the magic about how it's actually serving that file. It's because you're using an HTTP GET, and you have a method on this class called GET. So with the goal being to find a random movie, we should create a method called getRandomMovie. And remember, self is what you need to pass in order to be able to reference a class method. And then for now, we will return what we will actually need to do is make a list with at least 5 movie titles. And we will also randomly choose one of the movies. By we, I mean you all when you do the studio. And then return it. And then on the get, we will no longer write random out. Now we can start with content. Yeah, that's fine. So now we can initially set up the content. Start with an H1, say we have a movie of the day. And make sure we close that. So that'll be the first bit of content, and then we can add to that content, create a p tag. Remember the dot format. and then you can do that movie is equal to self dot get random movie. We'll keep a to do in here to pick a different random movie, and we'll display it under tomorrow's movie. So we can show what movie we're going to see tomorrow. And then finally, what we want to do is a self.response.write content. The reason that response is on there is because we are inheriting from this web app to request handler. And then response.write goes and takes the content that you just made and puts it doesn't like how I wrote the code. So we can come over here and refresh, and we can see that it went and updated it. Movie of the day, that's in the H1, and then the Big Lebowski is inside the P tag. Oh, that's right, I have it down here. I lost my URL. All right, so that is the walkthrough. So now we'll start with the studio. I have threw away all my work, so probably should have stashed that. That's too bad. So if you did check out that, make sure you're in Studio 1. That is where we will start. Well, there we go. It's just minorly different. So it starts, this is what you are starting with. The goal of today, you'll read in the studio as you make the changes. The overall goal is to basically fill out these to-do statements and start getting your HTML combined with the backend. So you are now free to work within your groups unless there are questions. I do want to open up for broader questions if you have them. And my wrist vibrated, so someone sent me a Slack message. So I think there's a question on if anyone lives in Liberty. So we have one, Tamara, up here in the front. Has volunteered as someone who lives near Liberty. All right, feel free to, unless there's anything else. All right, start working on the studio. Feel free, as a teacher fellow, if you haven't gotten through grading the assignment, make sure you do work on the studio. Do not work on your assignment right now. This is strictly studio time. So make sure you work with someone on the studio.
Yeah, this little work. Everybody pair up with the three. Oh, pairing up and work together.
Just try to think of a
That was what I was saying. You could create a function that is also has one screen. Yeah. We're not displaying the number. This is actually.
Does anyone else have issues getting the project, the studio that's run? So what I think I'm going to do tonight is just work over there, grade your projects, and if you need anything, just get my attention and I'll come back over to help getting the random item or anything else.
Since we submitted the link, are you just able to pull it up and see?
I can pull it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, dude. Is this working? Is this working? I have to unmute myself. All right. So if you are on Windows and you are having difficulty getting it to run at all, we all installed Python 3 at the During Unit 1, we all installed Python 3, which meant when you're trying to run it, you click run here, and then you click logs, and you see some nonsense about name. Exec file is not defined. So if this is the problem that you're getting when you attempt to run it, after you've added your flick list Python in here, the problem is that it's using the wrong Python interpreter. So you can kind of see that in this log message. When you scroll to the top of it, you can see that it's attempting to use Python 3. And Google App Engine only works with Python 2.7, the local client here. So the way to fix this, if you're on Windows, if you go to Edit, and then Preferences, so a little Edit button, and then Preferences, and then right here, it says Python path. You'll want to then select and then go to where your Python 2 is installed. Where's Google? Oh. This laptop does not have Python 2.7.
The other program files, that's all.
What program files?
The other program files. No, they-
This is Windows 10, the command block ability to do where Python.
I think there's only one Python on this machine.
Oh. Where?
Oh, error. So what you want to do is find where you have Python installed.
Before you close this, I just wanted to see if something happened.
Am I blind? How weird.
You actually have to type in the data path. You can't get to it through the Explorer.
Collapse.
I mean, you can get to it in the Explorer, but you can't browse to it. You have to actually type it up. Yeah, app data. Programs, I believe. Yeah, so there's not.
So this laptop needs to download Python 2.7. So as a bonus. So if you don't have Python 2.7, what you can do is you can go to python.org. Go to the download spot, click here.
You go back to the front page. That same user interface element. At the bottom it says latest Python 3.6 or Python 2.7.
Oh, there we go. There's a latest thing here. Click on the Python 2.7.13 if you need to get Python 2 because you do not have it. And then you can click the correct installer for your laptop. I believe this is the correct one for this laptop.
Go for it.
Probably gonna ask me for a password I don't have on this computer. No, it's just waiting to download it. The key here is that on that Python path, you'll hit select, and the default installation for Python 2 is normally, if you come over to this OSC, there will be a Python 2 7 folder. So everyone's downloading.
Can I just take a look at the app? Google app? I just wanted to see under help what the version is of this. So I have someone who is not.
Yeah. Make all the changes to the device.
Oh, yeah, Jeremy. This is version 1.9. Okay.
All right, in just a moment, you'll get to see what it looks like when it's successful. All right. So Python is now installed. Edit, preferences, Python path. Select, go to here, Python 2.7, and then make sure you click on the python.exe that is just Python, not the one with the W, and make sure you click on the one that is Python. Just as Python, click open. Click OK. Now you can click on your flick list app, click play. And then you can look at the logs and see that it is now running. And if you're curious, you can verify that at localhost 8080. And you'll see movie of the day, The Big Lebowski.
Sorry about that. Right, thanks for letting me know about that. That also probably covered people that didn't have iPads. Well, we weren't actually. But I'm sure people may have had it all.
Teaching fellows, this is the portion where you abandon your group for a few minutes and come over here in the corner. This is the group abandonment portion of the evening, teaching fellows. You'll go back to your group in a few moments. Reggie. We're going to get a Jonathan or a Sarah. This is a session that teaches us. Please. Yeah, and then no one can do that.
main reason for the same. Based on feedback.
I also watched I literally watched my. One thing they also look at, I think they look at it too. Before they start, they're like, oh, Netflix and stuff.
I'm supposed to be next week. No idea. I've used it one other time. The only expertise I have. The only reason I Google that's my yeah, my group was like I put the link in. I think I need to write some else. I think there's little shorts around like this. And because I enjoy it, but I think right, which that was also part of the goal. That's why I usually watch.
It's still the same format, as long as they. But if they see the they should.
I don't know what that rate.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get
Oh,
I
yeah.
guess you could just go into the
Yeah.
zero right now. What do you really grade it? It is the zero.
like that. I mean, that's normally what happens. This is great.
One day, have something ready. You're supposed to.
I got my ass back.
Tell your people to speak up a while.
That is.
Unless you change your settings, they add it on. So what's the problem? You are like,
I would be fully comfortable. I'm sure. The reason is it's just easier. I mean, set up for they could do something similar, which was But they manage that momentum. It's like
This one, so that they get started.
You get back up there, I'm talking to people asking if they're pushing back to the hospital.
just there.
The end of this, the very end of this studio just says to commit your changes.
They need to push back from there. They are so part of the.
They don't have to be in line.
They don't have to make like. So no need. That's what I just did that. So. But they do have to push back there. It's not necessarily the studio. Sort of does. So sort of. Share. Well, that's sort of.
Really see to other groups like. Format has changed. Because I see a lot of, when you start talking, everybody sort of talks out.
Which will be like 10 minutes.
It's because what's wrong with nervous. We'll say now the walkthroughs are like it's someone's classic. Make a change. Get status. Like, you would delete the files, one or the other, and run the status. Really not one. It's like your father
Yeah, like it's just the same. Let's just do that again. It's the same. I'm not offensive out throwing a trick at you.
Eventually.
So I had to set it in. Like a giant mirror.
I feel like God.
Okie dokie, we're gonna get the studio solution party started. First bit is actually not a solution to the studio at all, but I'm going to show you how with GitHub you can keep track of the changes you're making with the studio if you're curious, so that you can start saving those changes and pushing them up to GitHub if you so choose. So what we will cover will be going over forks with GitHub so that you can have a copy of this flick list Python code to work on your own that is outside of the current location, which is the launch code education/flicklist-python on GitHub. The link is in the class assignment for the studio. In GitHub, whenever you're on someone's repository, in the top right, you'll see this fork with a little fork icon and the number of forks that have already occurred for that repository. So if you want to have your own copy of someone else's repository, you can click the fork button. It will pop up and ask you who you want to fork it as. I will fork it as myself. And it will fork it for you, creating a new repository. And then now you can see up here, it's now under my user, Gary Poly flick list Python. And it tells you where I forked it from. So then what can be done here is you can do that clone URL, copy it, and then over here where I have Studio One, so if I type git remote, notice I have the origin, which that, if we wanted to see, points to the launch code education flick list python.git. You can see that with the -v option, which tells it to be verbose. I can add another remote. So in Git, you can have an infinite number of remotes. All the remotes you want to add, you can push your code to whomever or wherever will accept it. Now I can type git remote add. I will call this my personal remote. And then I pasted the repository. So the way this command works is git remote add, which says to add another remote location. And I'm naming that remote location personal. So the current other remote location is called origin already. I'm making a new one called personal, and I'm making it be to my GitHub account instead of launch codes. I do that, and then I can run the git remote. I can now see I have two remotes, origin and personal. Now if I do a git remote show personal, it goes and shows all the branches on my personal repo, which are the same as the other. But the git remote -v shows now that I have two repositories. I have origin, which points to launch codes, and I have personal, which points to my own. So now what we can do is I can go hit checkout, create my own branch. We'll call this Studio One Solution. So now I've made a new branch. If I type git branch, I have three branches. I have the walkthrough that we did a few minutes ago. Studio One, which is what I just branched off of, and then Studio One Solution, which is the branch I just created, and that little asterisk means it's the branch, current working branch, the one that we're going to be doing our work inside of. So the goal of the studio was to randomly get a list of movies and show them on the screen. So if you remember, we need to import random, because when you do something random, odds are you'll need the random package. So we'll need a list of movies to start off. So we can have some movies in here, which I am lazy, so I don't want to type that out. We need 5 movies. And we'll have Star Wars for the last movie. And then next up, we need to have a way to randomly choose a movie. So we'll call this the random movie index. And random has all those methods that we covered before. Rand range. There we go. So random.rand range, and we know that we want to go the length of the movie. If you remember, before I almost fell down tripping over the HDMI cord, rand range takes an integer and will give you back a random number that is less than, from 0 to 1 less than that number. So we're safe to do the length of movies, which will be 5, because the largest number we will get will be 4, which would be the index of where Star Wars is. So then now what we can do is we can then return a movie at random movie index. Another one you could use if you wanted to simplify what was here is you could use random.choice. If you give it an iterable, it will grab one out of the iterable. So 2 ways to solve this.
What if the list was blank? You said something about
It will return. So that question was, if the list is blank, what will happen? It will get nothing, none, because the iterable has nothing. I don't think so, but I'd have to check. It might return an error if there's nothing in your list on random.choice. I'm not 100% certain. So now we still do self.getRandomMovie. And I'm going to change that. And every class that we do going forward, I'm going to end up changing it so that it matches the professional Python developer guide, PEP 8. And I will continue doing that to basically show you good practice in Python professional development. You would write the code following that guide. Most anywhere you would get a job writing Python code. So then what we do here is we go and we're going to leave this part the same. We're going to start off building the response. We'll start off with the movie of the day. We'll have our content. And then we know that we wanted to add tomorrow's movie next. So we can start off with getting the tomorrow's movie. Oh, stop sharing my screen. All right, my screen's back to being shared on the YouTube video. So for those on YouTube, watching the video, added the movies, randomly getting a movie, and then we're updating the get method that's going to return the response to the browser. The first thing we do is we get whatever the tomorrow movie is going to be, and then we keep adding to this content, which is going to be that H1, tomorrow's movie, and then we'll start off with that P tag, same as up above. We'll go with the tomorrow movie, and then you got to close off that P tag. So now that should be working. There it is. Nope. I chose 8002, didn't I? Yep. So it starts off with the Big Lebowski, and then tomorrow's will be Star Wars. And then now we can sort of see the actual randomness occurring each time you refresh the page, it ends up getting a different value. That would be a terrible day. That would be all right. Really just Aladdin twice is what I think everyone wants. So now we've made these changes. And this satisfies the need of the studio to show those changes in the browser, randomly getting what we're going to watch today and what we'll watch tomorrow. The other thing that I want to show, so now we have a solution. We can see the only file that we have modified is the main.py. So if you run git status, you can see that we have unstaged changes to be committed. If you're really curious what those changes are that are unstaged, you can run a git diff command. And then it shows you what all red, the minus sign, is what's removed. Green is what's added with the plus sign. You can keep hitting enter, and it will show you what's there. And then eventually you need to hit Q. That'll take you back to the command line. Whenever I'm working at work, that git diff command is generally what I run before I make any commit to make sure that I didn't mess something up or I wasn't trying something out and updated some configuration that would end up changing our production website to stop pointing to its database. So it's always a good idea to run git status. And if you see a file in here that doesn't look like you should have modified it, then it's a good idea to check the changes to that file. So let's say for some reason I decided to just come in here and write some nonsense by accident. I'd run git status. I would notice, oh, it's index.yaml file. I don't remember doing anything with that. And then if I run git diff, and then that index.yaml file, I can see the changes I made because I just deleted everything in the file and typed nonsense. What you can do to actually fix that, so say you don't want any of the changes you made to a file, you're going to git checkout, and then that file. So now if I run git status, only file that has changed is main.py. That's your little bonus knowledge nugget for the night right there. You can fix the files that you've broken locally. But for the assignment, in the studio git status, we only changed main.py. So now I'll do git add main.py. I recommend following along if you have this as well. That is also true for the walkthrough and the studio going forward. The recommendation is to type along with me so that everyone will be on the same page because it will be needed. So if I do git add main.py and then run git status, we can see that I now have a change to be committed. So I can git commit, solution to the first studio. Run git status again. And there's nothing there to be committed. It's already committed. So now what I can do is I can run that git push. Remotes that I have two remotes, personal and origin. So I can do git push personal Studio One solution. And what we can see here in the outputs of that command run. So git push says I want to push my changes somewhere. Personal is what I called my GitHub repository on my GitHub account. That was the remote. So git push personal says, all right, I want to push whatever branch I'm going to specify next out to this remote. So in my case, my personal GitHub. The flicklist python.git specifically. So git push personal, go to my GitHub account and push the Studio One solution branch. And then you can see from the results of their nonsense, and then that it pushed it to my GitHub new branch called Studio One Solution. Specifically, it pushed the Studio One solution, my local one, to a remote Studio One solution branch. So now, over on my GitHub, GitHub's actually nice, and it will update here. You like push a brand new branch, and it will show you that, oh, you added the Studio One solution branch. So what we can actually see here in the GitHub UI, I can start typing Studio One solution. We can see it there. And then if we look at the commits, we can see that the changes that we just made are out there on GitHub, on my GitHub account. So that is how you would share any changes you're making on the Studio. If you want to share it with the person that you were working on the Studio with tonight, make it easy to share that way. Because you're not going to be able to push all of your changes to the launch code one, because that is the sort of gold master edition. So you can have your own little version like I do on my GitHub account. Are there any questions about the Studio solution or Git and GitHub here? You are free to have them. You can post them in Slack. You can yell them. All right, well, the awkward silence I think was enough. There's one question on the forking. If you want to fork a repository. So Launch Code Education has a whole bunch of repos. So I haven't forked Hello World before. So to give an idea of forking a new repo, so say you don't have it yet, click on your account. Most of you likely won't have to do that because you won't have multiple accounts. And then you can clone or download the same way you would any other repository. So you copy your link, go to wherever you want to clone that repository to. So git clone, full length, and then Hello World is there. And then I have it. The way this works is GitHub. So the flow that's happening here, whenever I'm on, so I'm looking at the launch code organization. They have a bunch of different repositories here. So here's a shared custom styles repository. This is a Git repository hosted on GitHub. Whenever I click fork, under the covers, what Git is doing is on its own server, it is cloning it to your user on the server. So we discussed how you have servers and clients. Right now, GitHub is being its own client, and that it says, all right, I want to take the launch code repo that exists here, and I want to fork it. That is shorthand for I want to use Gary Polly's GitHub account, and I want to clone the launch code repository that already exists, and I want to take it and put it on Gary's account over here. So now there are two of this, will be two of this shared custom styles repository. So in the same way that you have your repository on your computer, and GitHub has a repository that you push to, what's happening whenever you fork is the same thing. It just happens that it's on two of GitHub's servers instead of just being on your computer and one on GitHub server. So when I click fork here, I'm now cloning shared custom styles into my GitHub account on GitHub server. So now there are two repositories of shared custom styles. And then when I come over here and I copy the Git link, that doesn't do anything yet still. I have a Git repository on GitHub. It is the remote. So then over here, whenever I do git clone automatically says to create a directory that has the name shared custom style right there. It will create that directory, and then it will go into the directory and immediately go to GitHub and grab all of that code that is on GitHub. And you can sort of see in the output that it gives that that's what's happening. It clones into this folder it just created called shared custom styles. So that is pulling down from GitHub whenever it clones all of the code that's in that repository. So now I have the shared custom styles, and I'm on master. And whenever you clone a repository, you automatically have an origin set up at the URL that you clone from. So that automatically is already set up when you do a git clone. And then from this point, you can continue making changes, add them, commit them, and push them back up to GitHub. So what actually exists now is there are 3 repositories of shared custom styles. There's one on GitHub for launch code. There's one on GitHub for my account on GitHub servers. And then there's a third on my local machine called shared custom styles. And so that's one of the things that gets kind of weird about Git is that you have the same code in many places. And that is the reason you actually want to use a source control system like Git so that you can share those changes all around more easily. Otherwise, you would not be able to easily keep track of all the different changes that can happen. So that is all we have for this evening. If you have more questions on Git or the assignments, feel free to keep asking them to your TFs or to me or posting them in the Hello KC channel or the general channel in Slack. Also, feel free to put them on Piazza. We are happy to assist anytime that we can. I believe there's another assignment due Thursday of next week as well. Basically, every Thursday there's an assignment due. Just keep that mantra going.
Yeah. I don't think